Now, in this part of the video, you will be seeing the steps that the patient goes through when he's inside the clinic and what is delivered to the lab and what does the lab do. So usually when the patient is seated in his place, the patient is ready. We have examined the patient, made all examination procedures. We made x-rays for that patient. We decided that this patient is ready to receive his denture. So once he's ready, we do impressions. We have two ways of making impressions. An impression is the negative replica of the tissue, meaning that I want to know how does this patient tissue look like, because not all patients look the same. So I need to use a tray, okay? And we call this an edentulous tray, where it's rounded. It could be made out of metal. With the metal tray, we use compound, usually, and we take an impression with compound. This is one of the impression material. The second tray is made out of plastic. Sometimes it's not the same size of the patient, so we add some utility wax onto it in some specific areas. You will learn that later. But the idea is preparing the tray, selecting the tray first for the patient that is suitable for his size, then adding and modifying the tray in the way that it suits the patient, and then we take an impression. If we are using these trays, we use an alginate impression, and alginate is a powder that is mixed with water, and it becomes like a smooth dough, and it can flow around the area of the patient where he has lost his teeth. So we take an impression. If compound, we're using compound, we don't mix it with water, we actually put it in warm water. This will become soft, like dough, play dough, and we put it on the tray while it's very soft, and then we put it inside the patient's mouth and squeeze it into place, and once we take it out, we will get an impression of the tissue. And this is a lower impression, and this is an upper impression for the patient. So these are the delivered material. So this was clinic 1. So clinic 1 was an examination. After the examination and the approval of the patient, we select trays and then we take impressions, and these impressions called primary impressions. These are the delivered material. They go from clinic 1 to lab 1. In lab number 1, the technician will pour inside these impressions. So these are our primary casts. Usually we make them out of plaster because these are not the actual cast that we will be working on. These are called primary cast or study cast. We could identify the upper and the lower by looking at their direction. So these are the primary cast produced from these impressions. So the result are primary cast. In lab 1, after producing the cast, the technician does what we call a secondary tray. Now this tray is more accurate because it's done exactly to the size of the patient, not like this one. This one was not fitting in totally fit to the patient, so this one is more fit. With this tray, we send it back and it's delivered from lab 1. We go to the clinic with these trays. What do we do in clinic number 2? So this is the clinic number 2. The patient came back in the next clinic. We had our trays. We saw our trays from the lab. We checked their quality, they are good or not. If there are any sharp areas and extensions that should be removed, we check them inside in the patient's mouth as well. And once we finish checking them, we add a material called green stick. And we add it only on the borders, and we call this step border molding. Border molding is taking an impression of the borders alone to make them very accurate. Once we get a good impression from inside the patient's mouth of the borders, which after we call it border molding, we add an impression material over this inside the trays. We load the trays with impression material, and what we get is what we call secondary impressions. So this is the lower and this is the upper. These are the secondary impressions. These material are delivered to the lab. So the next result of clinic number 2 are secondary impressions. They go to the lab. The lab puts wax around them in a way we call boxing. They make a box around them. And inside that box, we pour our stone, and the result that we get are secondary casts. What do we mean by secondary casts? Secondary casts are casts that are stronger. They're made out of stone, not plaster. So these are the results of the lab number 2. So secondary cast. Over this cast, we make base plates. So these are base plates. And over these base plates, we make what we call wax rims. These wax rims are going to be recording inside the patient's mouth the bite of the patient. So we call them record blocks. So you have the names wax rims or record blocks for them. So this part is made out of acrylic, and this part is made out of wax. So that's why we call them record blocks. This is called the base plate, this is the wax rim, and all together they are called record blocks. These are the result of lab 2. These go to the clinic. What does the clinician do in clinic number 3? The dentist put these inside the patient's mouth and try to work them and adjust them until they bite and register the bite of the patient. They fix them together and send them to the lab. Also, the dentist takes the shade of the patient, so we will know the teeth that the patient, the best shade of the teeth for the patient. So the dentist takes the shade and takes the bite and sends it to the lab. The technician will mount these upper and lower wax rims on the articulator, using the record from inside the patient's mouth. So once these are on the articulator, once we open and close, this is the same way that the patient opens and closes. This step is called mounting. So the casts are mounted on the articulator, and now we're ready to put in teeth. So the technician will bring a set of teeth, acrylic artificial teeth, using the same shade that the dentist recorded, and then we'll begin setting the teeth, upper and lower teeth, in location and in inclusion. Once all of the teeth are set, we have now these two, and now we call them trial dentures. These are not actual dentures, these are trial dentures, meaning that they need to be verified and checked inside the patient's mouth. So these are called trial dentures. And these are the results of lab number 3, a trial denture. So the trial denture goes to clinic number 4 for the dentist to try inside the patient's mouth. The dentist tries them. If they are well and they occlude well, and the occlusion, the phonetics, the aesthetics, and everything regarding that patient are approved, and the patients like them, this is sent back to the lab, and it goes in a process called, so in lab number 4, we need to turn these dentures, trial dentures, into actual dentures made out of acrylic. So how do we change them? By putting them inside a flask. So these trial dentures, each one is put separate in a flask. Over the flask we add layers of stone. We melt down the layers. We remove by melting the wax. And we replace a dough of acrylic inside. And once we set, this goes to a heat bath, they cure and become solid. Once they solidify, we fracture off the stone from around them, and we get dentures. But the dentures are not finished, are not smooth. They have a lot of stone. So we do some finishing, removing excess material, smoothing them, polishing them, and the result we'll get upper and lower dentures that are ready to be delivered for the patient. So this is the result of lab number 4. It's the completed denture. This goes to the clinic. Clinic number 5, we do something called delivery. So these are the overview of the steps, the clinical and laboratory steps of the denture work. Try to compare your answers with what you have seen now.